Hi everyone, I'm Jack from Rack and Turn. I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share some thoughts on Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. This is a new release. It came out just a couple months ago, and it's a book that I was really looking forward to reading. And once I acquired a copy, and my wife and I read it together, thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a book I'd encourage you to read, whether you acquire your own copy, get it from the library. There's no evidence that this is Patel's debut novel. It's well written. And Patel accomplishes a couple of interesting things in the book. One, she gives us this thoroughly compelling main character in Kaikeyi. It's a first-person narration, and the way that the interiority is developed for Kaikeyi across the book is very, very strong. The book exists essentially as a reflection across, roughly 20 years of her life. And that works on a lot of different levels. We see her changes, we see her changing perceptions with others, her changing relationships with others, the way that her family and other characters are shifting. And we see her grow up as others grow up around her, or as others grow old around her. And all of those shifts are subtly drawn in. It's not necessarily that we're hit over the head with them as readers. But I think the other reason I would really, really encourage folks to read Kaikeyi is because it's a great gateway novel. It certainly was for my wife. It was for one of my colleagues at work, because I think there were some who wanted to compare Kaikeyi to Cersei, the Fabulous novel from Madeline Miller. And I understand that. In many respects, they're both works that are revising an ancient text, that they're really as well providing an explicit feminist revision of an ancient text. I'd say the critical difference is that Cersei is revising Greek texts and Greek firmly myths that no one really subscribes to nowadays, whereas Kaikeyi is a feminist revision of the Ramáyana, the ancient Sanskrit epic, and a text that is justly revered by many, many believers today. And so there's something very bold in the choice Patel has made to take this text, a text she grew up with, something that she notes in the preface, she remembers her mother and grandmother sort of arguing about, and takes a character who's not the main villain of the Ramayana, but who very much within the Ramayana is regarded as a villain, as an evil person, in some respects as almost a prototypical evil stepmother. And she takes that Kaikeyi from the Ramayana and gives now this side of her story. Why would she make the choices she made to exile Ram, to banish him, to snatch the throne away at the last minute? And what would lead her to do that? Who is this woman that in the Ramayana is very firmly viewed as a duplicitous person, as a traitor, not only to her family but to her nation? And so Patel makes a very bold choice there, but it works on a lot of levels. So I think this is a great gateway novel to exploring the history and culture of Southern Asia and the Indian subcontinent, of Hindu belief. And I found myself digging into different texts and rereading the Ramayana before I had embarked on Kaikeyi. And I enjoyed what Patel did in this book. I wanted to give a taste of the reading. I was born on the full moon under an auspicious constellation, the holiest of positions. Much good it did me. In Bharat, where the gods regularly responded to my prayers and meddled in mortal affairs, the circumstances of my birth held great promise. This did not matter to my father, who cared only that my brother Yudhajit followed me into the world minutes later under the same lucky stars. Regardless of birth position, Yudhajit, being a boy, was the heir to the Kaikeyi kingdom. I was but a dowry of 50 fine horses waiting to happen. For each of my mother's subsequent pregnancies, my father made sacrifices to the gods, requesting sons. In return, he was blessed with 6 more healthy boys, portents of future prosperity. The people of Bharat have often blamed my father for my sins, as if a woman cannot own her own actions. He was not a perfect man, that I freely admit, but for all his faults, he loved each of his sons fiercely. And she goes on, he goes, if he bears any fault for my actions, it is through his inaction. I remember few occasions when we exchanged words, and fewer still when he sought to speak with me, save one. And Kaikeyi, right away, from the beginning, we have this voice. We have a voice that is intelligent. We have a voice that is reflective, but we have one that is willing to sort of see through the niceties, see through the court gestures, see through the facade of language, of gossip, and to be much more unvarnished and plain and honest, to not pretend that her childhood was particularly happy, that she has felt honored throughout her lifetime, despite, as we will see unfold across the book, her many, many accomplishments, both in court pursuits and in military pursuits. Rather, we see someone who feels a little bit jaded and disappointed by life, and that narrative proceeds to unfold in startling detail. And the revisions that do exist are often very wonderful. The way in which we see Kaikeyi interacting not only with her family, with Yutajit, and her brother and her father, but also as she moves away ultimately to the great palace in Ayodhya, and the way that she interacts there with her new husband, with his previous wives who are still there with her, and the way that those relationships grow and then shift. One of the great and really fascinating aspects of the novel is what's regarded as the binding plane within the book. And that is a way where Kaikeyi learns to be able to see the way that she and other characters are bound together, and how with certain characters it might be a silver rod, or it might be a very thin blue string, and others it's almost like the branch of a tree, or it's gold. And the way that she can see these connections, and to her benefit, and she begins to manipulate those connections, but also manipulate them on behalf of others, particularly on behalf of women. And we get to see, and Patel's very honest about, she's taken ideas around close to a millennium of culture there in Southern Asia and brought it together into these 500 pages to give us this narrative. And it's not necessarily reflective of every historical incident, every historical culture, every historical technology, but to draw on those to try and create a portrait of what life could have been like for many women across that area and across that era. And the way that Kaikeyi is able to advocate for women, the way that she gradually finds ways to leverage her own power, her reputation, and the official power she has, but also the binding plane to create a more beneficent society, is really interesting. It's interesting to see the way that society shifts, even when she seems to have fallen low. And so I, as I said, really enjoyed this. There is a fantastic battle scene involving a chariot, and there are also very interesting ideas around Ram. And again, I thought it was very bold of Patel to present this revision, to have Kaikeyi not to be more sympathetic and to take the same action she takes within the Ramayana, but to do it from her perspective and to show why this would work. And apparently within her mother and grandmother's argument, the idea that, well, if Kaikeyi hadn't taken this action, then would Ram have ever, done what he does across the Ramayana? How would we consider that? In a way that on some level feels comparable to the question of like, well, what would happen if Judas hadn't betrayed Jesus? Like, do we owe Judas for the ultimate crucifixion of Jesus and then the subsequent resurrection within Christian belief? And so I think those ideas were really interesting, and I thought that Patel did an amazing job. I'd be curious to know if anybody else has read it, but it did send me thinking onto other texts. Of course, it sent me thinking onto the Ramayana. The Clay Sanskrit Library has a great translation of roughly the first 2/3 of the Ramayana. The funding for the Clay Sanskrit Library ran out before the translation was completed, both for this, for the Mahabharata, for the Ocean of the Rivers of Stories by Somadeva, but maybe one day we'll get those. But these translations are really, really fantastic. And then I finished it using, there's a number of translations. There's Ram the Steadfast from Penguin Classics, which uses Valmiki's text, an old version of it. And so that of course was in my mind, the Upanishads, and not just the sort of abbreviated one that's an older version from Penguin Classics, but this series, which does seem to predate the Ramayana, at least in Valmiki's version, and would have been an influence across culture there, and these have been interesting to sort of dig into. And then the Panćatantra from Visnu Śarma. I have not read all of this, but these are almost like folk tales or children's tales, a la sort of the fables of Aesop or the tales of La Fontaine. And so I've sort of been dipping into these, and I look forward to reading much more from these and sort of learning, much more about Indian culture, Indian history, Indian belief, and Hindu culture and Hindu belief. So this is a book I really enjoyed. I if you've read Cersei, certainly give this a shot. That was sort of how I approached it with my wife, and we each took something very different than we had taken from Cersei. It was what I had approached with a colleague at work, and again, she took something very different. But really, I think all of us have enjoyed reading the book. So anyways, I hope everyone's doing well. Thank you.